Time for Trebia, part 2. Just to recap then, what we have here is the Romans in red, the Carthaginians in blue. You've got the Trebia just above me there. The Roman force would be up first thing in the morning. They hadn't had a chance to eat. They would have been forming up for a couple of hours, marching, still not eaten, and then doing everything in really, really cold conditions, and then fording a river, which itself was about waist high, according to Polybius, or chest high, and very, very cold. So the condition of the men that then faced up against the Carthaginians would not have been ideal in any sense. In terms of numbers, both armies fielded around 40,000. The Carthaginians, which are blue, had additional numbers given to them by the Celts, because if you remember, I spoke in a previous video, I said that Hannibal had around 20,000 infantry, 6,000 cavalry when he arrived in northern Italy. But after his successes and his political nous, he had managed to add a few more from the Celtic tribes, significant numbers both in infantry and the cavalry. So they have around 30,000 infantry, thereabouts, and 10,000 cavalry. This is both the Numidian cavalry, which is probably one of the best cavalry units in the Mediterranean at that time, and the Celtic heavy cavalry as well. And they numbered 10,000, and he had 5,000 cavalry on each flank, and you can see them there with a diagonal line. As for Rome, well, they only had 4,000 cavalry, which meant that they had 2,000 cavalry posted on each flank, and the rest of it a mixture of infantry. In the opening stages of the battle, Polybius remarked that things were pretty 50-50, which is actually a huge compliment to the Romans, because, don't forget, they had not eaten that morning, they'd had to form up and march in very cold weather, and then they had to afford that river that was really, really, really cold as well. So all credit to the Romans. But then things started to unfold that weren't too good for them. For example, as you may have guessed, the cavalry of the Carthaginians was able to push that Roman cavalry way back. So now Rome had its flanks exposed. But there was a bigger problem, in fact, a very big problem that Rome wasn't even aware of. And by that, I'm talking about this. The night before the battle, Hannibal had 1,000 cavalry and 1,000 infantry placed secretly. These were hidden along the riverbank. And now, as the Roman army had forded the river, these were placed well and truly on its flank and rear. And of course, they did exactly what you were expected to do. They hit the Romans from the back and rear and hit them very hard. This is quite a good illustration of what probably happened. So you've got the Numidian cavalry. Remember, these guys ride up right close to you and they throw javelins at you and they get away. You can't lay a glove on them. Well, they would have had, shooting fish in a barrel type scenarios going on here, because you've got that entire flank and you've got all the rear. No one's going to get anywhere near them. They can just pick their targets, go back, pick their targets, rinse and repeat. You've got the Celtic cavalry, who would have got a bit more personal. And then you've got their infantry, who certainly would have hit the Romans on their flank and rear. And this would have caused the line to just fragment. And suddenly now you had Romans, who once were fighting in one unit, all now scrabbling and trying to escape with their lives. Ironically, the only success that Rome had that day just underlined how bad things were. 10,000 men punched through the centre of the Carthaginian line. Now, normally that would be a real big problem. And they turned round, saw what was going on and thought, we're not going back there. And they marched straight on and they went to Piacenza, or Placentia as it was back then. In terms of numbers, Polybius doesn't give any. And in a way, it's difficult to really use them as a metric because the battle had been won. Hannibal only lost a few men. He lost most of his elephants, sadly, due to the cold. And he did lose some cavalry and men to the cold as well. But in terms of battle casualties, there wasn't many, and these were largely found within the Celtic contingent. And the Celts would have been quite happy about that, because after all, they'd been given pride of place in fighting in the front lines, and they were also a resource that Hannibal could just replenish quite easily. So this had kind of been a PR win-win for him on that respect. If you want to know more about this, don't forget I did an Ancient History Hound podcast on the Trebia, the lead up to it, and in much more detail about it. If you want to ask a question, please do. And if you want to leave a comment, please do. And if you like this kind of thing, why not click follow?